So something that I see a lot of is ideas or concepts of what masculinity is, right? And I see a lot of men that have a lot of these ideas circulating. There's a lot going on with regard to this. A man is this, a man is dominant, a man is blah, a man is vulnerable, a man is... All of these ideas that we put on as if they're another mask as men. And it's like, I have to fucking be a dominant man, or I have to be a vulnerable man, and yet I'm running it as an idea, and that creates a massive trap. So a central point that we're seeing in terms of that arrival for man and woman in the partnership is that it happens organically, but it happens through... One thing I could say is commitment. It happens through understanding the feminine intelligence, and that the feminine in her and his body is always going to be calling them into that most organic physical expression of the essences. And the other thing is to the power and the functionality of what the masculine principle starts to reveal within the relating. So that's kind of a starting point. Bit of a sneeze. Excuse me. But they're sort of the starting points. Like I could distill it into three things. It's the commitment in the intimate partnership, which often isn't fucking there for most people. The commitment to actually do the fucking thing together. The second one is woman is more plugged into the feminine wisdom. So there has to be a humility in bowing to that wisdom, particularly when she's saying, oh, there could be something more real here, something more tangible here, something more grounded here. And often saying that to the man, but just generally regarding the relationship. And then the way that the masculine essence moves through the man, and the way that he can see the feminine and how that can help her unfold, because he's not getting lost in her surface level forms. So I just wanted to start there. And is there anything you want to kind of talk to on it?
Well, the issue with a lot of polarity-based or conscious relating-based teachings is that there is still this identification with being a man or a woman, which ends up divorcing you from the authentic expressions of masculine and feminine. So yeah, like what Jamie was saying, okay, a man should lead. And then you run technical practices to get better at leading, but that's not what you should be doing. You should be asking the question, like, what is it in you that's preventing you from that natural state of rest, let's say, as a man? And it's true for women too, because of course women need to be able to communicate and direct and lead as well. It's not strictly speaking a man or a woman thing, but in terms of man's essence opening up. Why is it not naturally there from a place of relaxation?
Yeah.
So the trap is, and we see this generally speaking more with men naturally, because you would expect more men to lean into the masculine imbalance and more women to lean into the feminine imbalance, although you can get both doing the vice versa thing. But generally speaking, we see men really fall into that trap of teaching and preaching on masculinity from a place of them being deeply divorced from their own rest into their own manhood.
And you can feel it, you can see it.
You can feel it and see it. And it feels like, it's like their energy is predominantly up here. Yeah. And perhaps it doesn't mean that that's bad, because perhaps there can be clarity or presence. These are qualities of consciousness. But in terms of the real individuation of the man, the manhood, the rest into the body. And for man to be able to do that, he needs to drop into his body, which is his feminine. So what I've seen these men in these sorts of teachings do is that they'll make this fallacy about the feminine where, the problem is that men are becoming really feminized and they're getting too stuck in their feeling and women aren't attracted to that. And the tricky thing is it's like half true, but there's a failure to recognize the difference, discern the difference between actually meeting the pain of the human experience, which would be the humility of consciousness, touching the experience honestly and genuinely releasing it from the system, versus an ego being in a victimhood around a feeling where it's actually divorced from the feeling. Oh, life is so hard for me. This is so sad. Women are so mean to me. Men are so mean to me. Like, that's not being vulnerable and in your feelings. And so these men go, oh, we don't want men are becoming really feminized because they're going into that. But
better create another identity on top of that.
But they're not being feminized. They aren't being feminized because their consciousness isn't actually touching the feminine when they're doing that.
No.
That's not an authentic expression of feeling. And so, of course, women won't be attracted to a guy that is going in a victimhood. I mean, but it's the same thing with women. When a woman's doing that too, it feels like you're being a child, and there's a divorcing from, like, what is the true feeling and what is the actual vulnerable meeting with this feeling, not the retraction that shows up as an identity. So what these men do, they go, oh, we don't want to do that. Okay, we have to be the man. And then they just do the same thing in the opposite direction, which is still divorcing from the feminine, the human experience, even more. And then they go into some idea of like, yeah, I'm leading. Yeah, I'm a man. And it feels all up here. And when a man is doing that, he's actually doing that on top of devastating insecurity. Mm-hmm. And that's why these men, as much as they'll talk about leading and manhood and they are deeply fragile, highly sensitive and reactive, and really controlling.
And often in a lot of pain.
In heaps of pain.
Because it's underneath that thing that they're basically clinging on to for survival. There's all that pain.
And it appears on top as, this is the masculine, and and then of course when women come in, and I've seen this happen with some men where actually intuitive women will come in and go, and some men too, but especially the women come in and go, dude, this feels, where you're writing this from feels deeply insecure and controlling, and this doesn't feel authentic. And what they do is go, oh, well, you just can't receive the masculine block. So it's just this super easy trap that they fall into, where they just project, because an intuitive woman or an intuitive man, a connected, mature person, isn't receiving my immature, identity-based, falsely penetrative consciousness, they must have an issue. But that's just a projection of the insecurity, because you're already rejecting your own manhood when you're doing that. And so, of course, people are going to be like, dude, this doesn't feel authentic, because you're not rested into your own manhood. Massively problematic.
This is a really big problem in a lot of the sales environments that I see. I've done a lot of work.
Same thing,
a lot of work with business owners, sales people, sales leaders, and this identity that men get into is fucked. It is a complete, and it creates pain not only in their body, but it also creates pain in other people, and I think it really needs to be addressed. And that thing, and then we hear men go, well, that's alpha or that's masculine or whatever it is. It's so not, because the dissolving of that, there's such a refusal to both let go of those structures and discover actually what pure consciousness is, and there's also a refusal to be
rested into the manhood.
So in either way you go, it's divorced from the masculine. It's divorced from the masculine as consciousness, and it's also divorced from the masculine as the restedness of the male. It's it's just a distortion.
So and then the trouble that we see, like with the male example that I'm using in the case of polarity-based teachings or conscious relating teachings, is that the women who end up encouraging these men are women who are operating from a wounded girl, and they're wanting to receive love and approval from the immature man that's incapable of loving them. And that's a big problem, because then the women will come in and they'll give positive feedback for a man who's not in his balls. Yikes, not good. And because the women aren't discerning the difference, and they go, oh yeah, I don't want to love my man when he's vulnerable in his feelings, because that's he's not leading. This is entitlement and ridiculousness. And it's also again, discerning, because the reality is, as the woman, you're going to be the leader into the places that are excruciatingly painful for him to touch. And you're going to have to be able to discern when he's either going into this hard thing to avoid his feeling, or if he's going into his victimhood around the feeling, which is still, again, not genuinely meeting the feeling. Okay? You have to learn the difference. And if you as a woman don't want to take responsibility for basically your maturity and your leadership in bringing in the meeting of that ground of the feminine, of the vulnerability, If you don't want to do that, cool, that's fine. But you're going to attract polarized, disconnected men who are refusing to touch these places of hatred and insecurity and powerlessness within themselves, which again is preventing the real man from emerging.
And it's only through the emergence of the real man, when he starts to shine through, that he can actually help women to heal. Because she goes through so much more depth. I mean, the pain that comes through her body relative to his is way more, and it requires him to be at a point where he can hold a consciousness, which isn't a dissociation. It's a full embrace of unconditionality in that moment with her. And I don't mean that as an idea. Don't take it as an idea. I mean, he has dissolved enough of his reactivity to the surface level, which can only happen when he can dissolve his reactivity to his own depths first. But he's gone through that process so that he can be with her as she lets go of the leaves on her tree, so to speak, as she goes through all of that stuff. So it's just, there's no way a woman can really undo without a man that is prepared to do that drop. So she leads him down. But at a certain point, he can actually help her. And he does help her profoundly in such an amazing way, because as he goes down, which happens through her leadership, she helps him to go down.
Her leadership.
He senses the true nature of her, which is not all the distortions that he's inherited from all this other shit, all the past girlfriends, all the mother, all this stuff. He knows her for the truth of her in his body. What does that mean in the relating? When his partner, which is an expression of her, is going through her layers of conditioning, he stays true to what he knows. That's the essential function of we could say the masculine or the male essence in the relating, and that transforms the woman that he's with. But it requires him to lose everything. It requires such a humbling.
He has to go so deeply into his feminine as his human experience before he can do that naturally.
Yeah.
And it's like, woman's unconscious is not going to open until it it's
ready.
It's extremely intelligent. It's happening all underneath what's appearing on the surface and what's happening with surface consciousness. It's not something that can be driven by the mind or ideas or process.
Yeah.
Nature is deeply intelligent. 4 billion years of evolution behind. It's just so much more intuitive, and there's so much more going on that we never get to see.
Yeah.
And it just emerges when we're ready.
Yeah.
And that can't be forced. So, of course, the immature women, the safety for the immature woman is to go with a man who's either in his victimhood, blah, blah, poor me, I don't want to take responsibility, I'm just going to whinge, or the other expression of the same thing, which is his hyper, I lead and I create polarity by being an alpha male, coming from an idea, not expansive, not rested, and actually on top of that, all that insecurity.
Yeah.
That's safe for woman to go to if she wants to keep hold of her egotistical crap.
Yeah.
Because that's why she'll do that. She'll pick a man that can't open her. And you might think, oh, well, he leads and I'm attracted to that.
Is he leading you into the depth of your true nature, or is he leading you, where's he leading you?
And often when that happens, there may very well not be attraction there because there's a refusal for the self to die. So often when man gets stronger in his love, it doesn't show up as woman wanting to be submissive. It shows up as woman having resistance to him. Yeah. Which is something they won't talk about in polarity teachings, because it's all about creating surface level attraction from the perspective of the ego.
Yeah.
Because the question is then, why women are you not attracting in a man that can open you, or why are you not attracted to men that are actually able to love you?
And also, for a man to open a woman, he has to open his own woman.
Because the body's the earth, guys.
I understand you could do a polarity weekend, you go and you get people together and they drop into different qualities and then they might be able to open each other. But to do it in a committed relationship for over 2 years, you have to know how to open your own feminine before you can open a woman.
And that's what will always happen, because woman will open her next rounds, and often what it will bring up in him, at least for some time, in the process, it'll bring up resistance and retraction in him. Like, oh, I can't love that. Or he might try and do his, all right, I'm being unconditionally present, but I'm like running it from an idea and underneath.
And a retraction. And a retraction.
You know, so again, woman has to be mature enough and sensitive to her own intuitive knowing to sense, you know, is he actually showing up here, even if he's going through the motions of showing up? Like, is he actually present?
Yeah.
And often he's not present because that is stirring up something in him that he's going to have to learn to love in himself first before it can show up as, oh, now he can show up as presence and support for woman. And to some degree that happens in the reverse as well. I mean, there are times when James is cracking his own earth, where his feminine unconscious is rising, and it puts a pressure on me to expand into greater levels of unconditional presence and compassion and love and consciousness, let's say. So I have to hold space for him while something in him is undoing. And you think, oh, that's not polarity. But that's love. That's love and support for one another. Because he is going to crack into his own ground. And every time he will do that and it opens, then more of the man is there. And when more of the man is there, then more of my woman starts to open there.
We have to also talk about the truth of polarity, because a lot of what people talk about polarity as is sexual chemistry or chemistry or attraction that is coming through essentially compatible or subconscious kind of meshing, coming together. The patterns kind of fit each other. Only the true polarity gets realized when he's down enough and he can actually be what he is, and he can actually love how he's meant to love. It happens through dissolving. Sometimes you might actually dissolve a surface layer of polarity and you drop out of that and you go, oh fuck, there's no attraction. And then you go down and you go, actually, I'm attracted to woman by virtue of the fact that I'm a man.
As the natural state of rest.
Yeah.
But it's a completely different map of attraction, because then it's more just the movement of unity rather than I'm a separate self and I'm a separate self. And from that separation, we are like magnetized to each other in this way.
Which, yeah.
Yeah, so there's a lot of confusion about this. We didn't really talk about the feminine imbalance. It's sort of inherent in what we spoke about. But I suppose the way it shows up for a woman, let's say, or a man who's imbalanced in the feminine, is that there's a refusal to take responsibility for cultivating masculine consciousness. And you can tell teachers or instructors that are in that because there's a constant obsession with the lack of masculine. And so you see this, like, guys, I can say right now, there's a big conversation about narcissism at the moment in the zeitgeist, and that's all really relevant stuff. I had a lot of narcissistic abuse in my past. I totally went down that thing of like, how is this warped me and what does that mean? But I've seen people get stuck in this where there's still an obsession with that narcissistic pathology, where the obsession is coming from a lack of healing that wound, of receiving that consciousness.
Yeah.
And there's a refusal to take responsibility. And that can be very dangerous, because then you're just projecting your lack of integrated masculine everywhere. And I can think of a few women, actually, off the top of my head. Of course, I won't name names, just seeing what's there in these different networks that I have seen people in. I've seen a few women that have so-called feminine teachings where they have not integrated the masculine, and they have deeply fragmented relationships with men, and they're always obsessively talking about that, like, evil male masculine consciousness, narcissism, like, oh my god.
Yeah, it becomes this kind of almost like this fantasy, or
it's a fantasy. And before I forget it, sorry darling, but before I forget it, they are still attracted to men like that. And they're still looking for love from men like that.
While also resenting and hating that.
Yeah, because you've been hurt by that. But the fact that you're still obsessed with it means it hasn't been like processed through your system enough to open to a new imprint and actually start having healthy relationships. And of course, I'm using women as an example, but you can see men like this as well. Men who fall into that imbalanced feminine, where it's like they do the same thing with men, or even narcissistic women. Because you can have plenty of narcissistic women that it's still operating with that immature male masculine consciousness, like that consciousness. So a man or a woman could operate like that too. So I'm just giving these examples, guys, because it's important that we start being able to discern what's going on there. And it's not about shaming people who are in these imbalances, or, you know, bad mouthing them, or going, oh my God, like they just want power, or trying to manipulate, or like, you know, they're so messed up. It's just about having enough of that connection to your intuitive knowing to just see where people may have their shortcomings, and where it might actually be not helpful to absorb information from someone that is moving with that shadow. Because I do see people with good intentions that they maybe get involved with these teachings because of their own imbalance, so they're attracted to that, or even because a friend was in that, or their friendship group is involved in that, and they can end up absorbing information that becomes counterproductive, and down along the path it's just more stuff to unlearn. So it's an enhancement of ego rather than a dissolving, which is where the true intimacy, the true organic relating happens. Sorry, go ahead, darling.
The true test of a teacher's integration is whether or not they're in a functional, committed partnership.
Which seems obvious, but...
Yeah, because that will reflect what it needs to reflect. It will determine whether they're actually in their essence.
Yeah. And it's okay if there's a journey to that. It's okay if it's like not, you know, it doesn't mean that you can't have a legitimate teaching if you're not in a functional relationship. Of course not. But it's like, where is that, just the honesty with where that process is, you know? And I do think that at some point, if you're really talking about true masculine and feminine wisdom, the ultimate place that this is revealed and shows up and is taught to any individual is really through partnership, because it just brings up all of those distorted imprints that we get from interpreting mother and father as God, you know, and all the way through the generations. Yeah. It's probably a good place to end it.
Yeah.
Kids. Right, if you've watched to the end, thank you, and let me know if you have any thoughts or questions, and we'll talk to you soon.
Bye.